All righty. It's not ESPN's 30 for 30. However, it is my 98 for 98. The 98 seasons in the history of the New York Giants, New York football Giants. I'm trying to get it done in 98 days. Probably not going to get it done in 98 days, but I'm going to try to get it done before the beginning of the season, which starts September 10th against the Dallas Cowboys. We're halfway into the 60s. We're at season number 41, the 1965 NFL season for the New York Giants. They had a nice bounce back in 1965. Got to give them a lot of credit there. 2-10-2. And well, this was basically the three seasons, 64, 65, and 66 was like a mountain. It was like, yes. 64 is over here. That's down in the valley, darkest depths of the abyss. That's 2-10-2 right there. Then they climbed their way up to the mountain peak right here, where they were 7-7. Then, of course, the 1966 portion, they fell back down into even deeper into the abyss, like under the abyss, like halfway to China. They were 1-12-1. So they 2-10-2, 7-7 up here, and then 1-12-1 over here. The worst team in the history of the New York Football Giants, 1966. But that joke, that comedy show, that's tomorrow. Right now we're at the peak. We're way up here. They're 7-7. This is like my other video I put out yesterday, the wilderness years, the years of the Lost Boys. We're like 1964 to 1980. Whew. 17 seasons. They had 3 seasons where they were 500. This would be one of them. 68, 69 with the other 7-7. No, I'm sorry. 67, 68 with the other 7-7s. The first 2 years they got Frank Tarkin, then they were 7-7. 69 they fell to 6-8. But 1965, 1967, 1968 they were 7-7. 1970 they had 2 winning seasons from 64 to 80. So 1970 they were 9-5. 1972 they were 8-6. But so they had a nice bounce back. I mean, you go 2-10-2 and you bounce back to 7-7. If I'm not mistaken, let me check this. I do believe Ali Sherman. I do believe he was the coach of the year. They have it here. I don't know. My bad. George Halas was the coach of the year. What the heck did he do? The Bears were 9-5. Yeah. Well, they also got in 1965. The Bears also got Dick Butkus and Gale Sayers. So I'm not sure how it can be he was the coach of the year. But I mean, Ali Sherman, he's the coach. He's my coach of the year. 1965. You take a team from 2-10-2 up to 7-7. That's pretty impressive. So, but so it was a nice bounce back season. However, as I said, 1966 would be a totally different story. Now, this season was the Giants. Y.A. Tittle had retired after 64, and the Giants needed better quarterback play. So they went out and got themselves for the next 2 seasons. They went up and they got Earl Morrall. They had a trade for him. Let's see here. I got it up written. I got it there somewhere. Yeah, well, all right. The Earl Morrall trade. The Giants shuffling the skill of a card deck dealt away guard Darrell Dess and let's see here. Defensive back Everidge Barnes. Well, they had to do some. They had a trade actually with a couple teams. They had a trade with the Cleveland Browns, and the Cleveland, and then the Cleveland Browns. The Giants traded Everidge Barnes to the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns in return gave Mike Lucci to the Giants and a future draft pick to the Giants. Then in return, the Giants went to the Detroit Lions and traded Darrell Dess, their guard, Mike Lucci, who wound up being a very good linebacker, and a future draft pick, and they got Earl Morrall in return. So the Giants had to do some wheeling and dealing there. But it goes to show you, I mean, what wound up happening with the Giants is that, they started trading away all their, all the guys. They traded away Erich Barnes, who was a good defensive back for him. He was only with the Giants, I believe, for 4 seasons. They traded away Dick Modzelewski, good tackle. They traded away Rosie Brown, who's another Dick Modzelewski, defensive tackle. They traded away a lot of guys on the defense. Andy Robustelli retired. They traded away Rosie Greer, who was a defensive tackle. They traded away Dick Modzelewski, who was a defensive tackle. They traded away Sam Huff, their middle linebacker. They traded away Erich Barnes, who was a good defensive back. I mean, I said their problem was, they needed good quarterback play, and the guys that they had, after Till retired, the guys behind him just couldn't get the job done. So they went out and they got themselves Earl Morrall, who was our question is a decent quarterback. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, he took 2 different teams into the Super Bowl. He played in Super Bowl 3. They lost to the Jets, the Colts. But he also took this Bob Greasy in 1972. The Miami Dolphins went undefeated. They won the Super Bowl. They beat the Redskins 14-7. But Bob Greasy broke his leg during the season. Earl Morrall was the backup. He came in and he directed the team throughout the rest of the season. They were 14-0. Bob Greasy came back in the playoffs after his leg healed. And he came back in. I mean, he just started firing darts like nothing happened to him. And they wound up winning the Super Bowl. But I mean, Earl Morrall, played was in 2 different teams that went to Super Bowl. So more than adequate of a quarterback. The problem was, Earl Morrall needs a good team around him. And that's what the Giants did not have. I tell you what, their passing was rather impressive. I mean, if you look at some of these stats that the Giants had, I mean, the yards per reception were rather remarkable. I mean, let's see, Earl Morrall, he was 7-7 as a starting quarterback. Had Gary Wood behind him. He's not a very good quarterback. More of a backup quarterback. But let's see, Earl Morrall threw for 22 touchdowns and had 12 interceptions. I mean, very, very, very respectable numbers. 51% completion. But I mean, if you look here, all right, what the Giants had, let's see, they drafted Tucker Frederickson in the first round. He had 24 receptions. Joe Morrison, he was a flanker. He had 40. He led the team with 41 receptions. But if you look, these next 3 guys, Del Schaffner, he only had 22 catches for 388 yards, but he averaged 17.6 yards of reception. But these next 2 guys, Aaron Thomas, a tight end, caught 27 passes for 631 yards, 23.4 yards of reception. He averaged 23.5 yards of reception as a tight end on 27 catches. But that wasn't even a big one. The biggest one is, sadly, the gentleman who just passed away recently, Homer Jones. 26 catches, 709 yards. He had 6 touchdowns. So basically 1 out of every 4 receptions he had was a touchdown. 27.3 yards of reception. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. The Giants averaged 15.7 yards of reception. Now, of course, it's not like the way it is today, where like every, they're completing 70% of their passes. That's not the way it was. I mean, back then it was totally different. But I mean, they averaged 15 points every time they completed a pass. 15 points, almost 16 yards every time they completed a pass. I mean, rather impressive. Their running was just so-so. I mean, they averaged 3.9 yards a carry. They gave up 4.4 as a defense. They only scored 12 rushing touchdowns. As I said, they had they threw 23 passing touchdowns and had 12 rushing touchdowns. Everything was pretty. They averaged, let's see, they scored 19.3 points per game. They gave up 24.1. So their defense was, still very susceptible, to big plays. And in 1966, their defense would go from giving up 24 points a game this year to 35 or 36 points a game they would give up in 1966. So the defense was going to get far, far worse. One thing I wanted to point out, which is rather comical. Rather comical. Giants had Bob Timberlake as their kicker. He got hurt, I believe it was against Cleveland, which would wind up being what game? The sixth game of the season? Sixth. In the beginning, it might have been the opening kickoff or something like that against Cleveland in the sixth game of the season. So basically, pretty much he played 5 full games. Their kicker, Bob Timberlake. I'm sorry. Andy Steinkula. Andy Steinkula was their field goal kicker. All right. He got injured. He's the one that got injured. He was 3 for 7. So basically in the first 5 games of the season, he was 3 for 7 on field goals. He got injured in the Cleveland game, in the beginning of the Cleveland game. So Bob Timberlake took over the field goal duties. Bob Timberlake made his first field goal, which I think was against Pittsburgh. His first field goal try, which I think was against Pittsburgh. Well, I'm not exactly, it doesn't show right here, so I'm not exactly sure. But what he did, he made his first field goal try. Andy Steinkula. I'm sorry, Bob Timberlake. He made his first field goal try. Then he continued. Then after that, after he made his first one, he missed the next 14. So he was 1 for 15 on field goal tries. Bob Timberlake made his first one, so he's 1 for 1. He was pretty good on extra points. Actually, extra points, he was 21 out of 22 after Andy Steinkula got injured. So Bob Timberlake took over all the field goal kicking duties and all the extra points. But I mean, so Bob Timberlake, was 21 out of 22 for extra points. Rather impressive. But he was 1 out of 15 kicking field goals. He made the first one. He missed the next 14. So the Giants all season long in 1965, somehow they were 7-7, and they only made 4 field goals all year long. There were 4 out of 25 kicking field goals. Basically, they made 1 out of every 6 field goal tries. 1 out of every 6. Could you imagine that today? As a team, they gave up 16 field goals. They gave up 16 out of 29. So their opponents only made 55% of their field goals against it. But the Giants made 16% of their field goal tries. 4 out of 25. The Giants, let's see, 1965 season was franchise's 41st season of the National Football League. The Giants were led by fifth-year head coach Ellie Sherman and finished with a 7-7 record, which placed them in a tie for second in the Eastern Conference with the Dallas Cowboys. And they were 4 games behind the Cleveland Browns, who finished at 11-3. During the offseason, the Giants traded for quarterback Earl Morrall. New York began with 2 wins in their first 3 games and held a 4-4 mark before a 2-game losing streak. They won 3 of their next 4 games before losing the regular season finale, which was the second game against the Cowboys. Morrall started all 14 games for the Giants, throwing 22 touchdown passes and 12 interceptions. Tucker Frederickson topped the team with 659 rushing yards and had 6 touchdowns, including 5 on the ground. Joe Morrison led the team with 41 receptions, while Homer Jones led the team with a team-high 709 receiving yards and 6 touchdown catches. Defensively, the Giants, Spider Lockhart were the Giants drafted, and Dick Lynch each had 4 interceptions. Jim Katcavage led the team with 5.5 sacks. And Tucker Frederickson and Rosie Brown were selected to the 1966 Pro Bowl because of that. Let's see. During the 1965 season, it says White Tittle announced his retirement from professional football. On June 29, 1965, the Giants president, Jack Mara, died at age 57. And July 1965, this was a joke, wound up being a joke. Coach Ali Sherman signed a 10-year contract. Holy cow, at $50,000 a year. He was fired in September 1969 during the preseason, 1969. So he signed a deal in 1965 for 10 years. He came off a 2-10-2 season, and he signed him for another. Let's put him up for 10 years. Oh my God. But he was fired 4 years later. So the Giants, because of their 2-10-2 finish, had the number 1 overall pick in the draft in 1965. And with that, they took Tucker Fredrickson. However, future Hall of Famers were taken later in the first round. So we're going to go to that right now. Let's go to that. Let's go to the draft here. Let's see the draft. So the Giants took Tucker Fredrickson, but the pick number 2, the 49ers took Ken Willard. There's the 2 solid picks. They're both those players went to Pro Bowl, so solid picks. But the problem was that the Bears had picks 3 and 4. They took Dick Butkus at number 3, and they took Gale Sayers at number 4. The Giants could have had Gale Sayers, and they could have had Dick Butkus, but they took Tucker Fredrickson. Also, the thing is that on the board, the Cardinals chose Joe Namath, who actually wound up signing with the Jets because they gave him a bunch of money. But, I mean, the Giants could have actually drafted Joe Namath as their quarterback. But the Giants missed out on a lot, especially early on. I mean, some of their picks were once again, they took Chuck Mercine in round 3. I think he played the 1 season with the Giants. They took Bob Timberlake, who wound up being a quarterback. He only played the 1 season. He was the one that missed all those field goals. He played 1 season for the Giants. I mean, there was a bunch of good players out there that the Giants just missed on. But they did have later on in the draft. In round 8, they took Willie Williams, who was a good defensive back for the Giants. He played from 1967 to 1960. Well, he played 1 season for the Giants in 65. Then he played with the Raiders in 1966. And then he came back to play for the Giants from 67 to 73. So he was in the back, the defensive backfield with Spider Lockhart from 1967 to 73, and also in 1965 too. So I mean, they had it was a good, solid defensive back for the Giants. But the Giants also selected. Let's see, I think it's later on. The Giants also took some guy named Ben Crenshaw. I mean, the only Ben Crenshaw I'm ever familiar with is the golfer Ben Crenshaw. They took Ernie Coy. They took Chuck Mercine. They took Tucker Fredrickson. Those guys were the baby bulls. None of them lasted a real long time. I mean, Chuck Mercine was there for a year. Ernie Coy was there for, I think, 3 years. Oh, no, he was there for 6 years, 65 to 70. 1970, he didn't really play that much at all. I don't even know if he played at all, 1970. He didn't, I mean, he got a few carries. He didn't get many carries. 1970, John Johnson and Tucker Fredrickson got most of the carries. So the Giants drafted a lot of the baby bulls, Fredrickson, Mercine, and Coy in the 1965 draft. But the Giants took Spider Carl Lockhart in the 13th round. Very good pick there. But other than that, the Giants, let's see. I think that was pretty much about it for the Giants as far as anybody else. 20 rounds they took. Yeah. So they went up with a couple guys, and they added, but I mean, a lot of their drafts in earlier, 62, 3, and 4, they had a lot of misses. The guys were trading away and guys were retiring and they couldn't fill them because they weren't drafting well. This draft wasn't too. I mean, this draft, at least they got pretty much 3 guys Williams, Spider Lockhart, and Tucker Fredrickson. But the problem was that, they took Tucker Fredrickson with the first overall pick, and they could add Dick Butkus, or they could have Gale Sayers. I mean, there's a ton of other guys they could have had. I mean, a ton of guys. But, yeah, it is what it is. Let's see, the 1965 NFL season here. It was the 46th regular season in history of the National Football League. It was the 41st for the Giants, the 46th for the NFL, because the Giants are 5 years younger than the NFL. The Giants started in 1925. The NFL started in 1920. The Green Bay Packers won the NFL title by defeating the Cleveland Browns 23-12. And this was the last championship game before the Super Bowl era started. So starting in 1966, there was a championship game. And then whoever won that went to the Super Bowl, which wound up being the Green Bay Packers, the first two. They beat the Dallas Cowboys in the next two championship games, and the Green Bay Packers went to the Super Bowl the next 2 years. Let's see here. This is the NFL draft. The 1965 NFL draft was held on November 28, 1964 at New York's Summit Hotel, with the first pick the New York Giants selected back Tucker Fredrickson from Auburn University. Now, this was the second time, and the only other time that the Giants had the number one overall pick. The first one was in 1951 when they won a lottery. They had a lottery back then, and that was the year the Giants won the lottery. So they got the first overall pick, and they took Kyle Rote from SMU. Great college player. It says here. Major rule changes. The sixth official, the line judge, is added to the officiating crew. This change is sometimes referred to as the Fran Tarkenton rule, after the Minnesota Vikings quarterback who developed the nickname the Scrambler as he ran around the backfield to avoid being sacked by the opposition. With the line judge stationed on the line of scrimmage opposite the head linesman, it made it easier for the officials to judge whether or not Tarkenton or any other mobile quarterback crossed over the line before throwing the ball. 5 officials have been used since 1947 when the back judge was added. So the Fran Tarkenton rule was in 1965. Because he would just run around, and sometimes he would head toward the line of scrimmage, and it was either yay or nay. It's either throw the ball or just keep scrambling. So sometimes he would get, I guess, so close to the line of scrimmage he would throw the ball, but I guess sometimes the defense thought he was over the line of scrimmage, or maybe he wasn't. So they added. So now they got like 2 guys on looking right down the line of scrimmage to see if he comes over the line or not. Conference races. Now, there wasn't much going on in the Eastern because the Cleveland Browns won with a record of 11-3. The Dallas Cowboys was tied with 7-7 with the Giants. The Giants were 7-7. However, in the Western Conference, all right, the Green Bay Packers and the Baltimore Colts were both tied at the end of the season at 10-3-1. So therefore, they had a playoff game to see who would go to the championship game. So the playoff game was played in Green Bay. Baltimore Colts, Gary Quazzo and Johnny Unitas were both injured. The Baltimore Colts had used as their quarterback Tom Matte in the championship game. So basically, it was Bart Starr versus Tom Matte for one play. The first play of the game, after the Green Bay got the ball from a kickoff, Bart Starr threw a pass. It was completed. The ball got fumbled. Baltimore picked the ball up and ran back for a touchdown. Well, Bart Starr went over to the sideline, right around by the goal line, to try to see if he can make a tackle or something like that. Well, I forgot who it was. Somebody hit him, and I don't know, it dislocated his shoulder or whatever it was, but knocked Starr out for the whole game. So Zeke Bretkowski had to come in. So for this playoff game, to see who would go to the championship game, we had the Packers' second string quarterback in there, Zeke Bretkowski, and the third string quarterback. It's kind of like what the 49ers went with Tom Matte. He threw a few. He didn't throw many passes. They ran the ball a lot. But Baltimore was up 10-0 in this playoff game. Baltimore was up 10-0 at the half. The Packers scored a touchdown in the third quarter, I believe it was, to make it 10-7. Well, the Packers got the ball and they were driving at the end of the fourth quarter, and with about 2 minutes to go in the game, I think after the play was over, I think it was like 1:58 to go. Don Chandler, who wound up being the kicker for the Green Bay Packers, to try to kick a field goal to tie the game up. Don Chandler, they got him from the Giants. If you look at this, if you look at highlights of it, I think the next season, I think they raised the goalposts because of this. They said the field goal was good to tie the game at 10-10 to send it into overtime, where the Packers wind up winning with a field goal to win 13-10 to send them to the championship game, which they wind up beating the Cleveland Browns in the championship game. But I mean, if you look at it, it sure looks like the ball was on the outside of the goalpost, and even a lot of the Colt players themselves were kind of thought that the ball, the trajectory of the ball, was outside of the goalpost. Now the ball has to be over the goalpost. It doesn't have to be inside the goalpost, but it has to be at least over the goalpost. No, I don't think any of the ball can be, as it's going over the goalpost. None of the ball, I don't think, can be sticking on the outside of the goalpost. And if you look at the highlights of that play, it sure looks like the ball doesn't go inside or over the goalpost. It looks like it's on the outside of it. It looks like looks like the ball missed. And it is what it is. But I mean, the refs called it good. May not have been good, but so the Packers tied the game up at 10-10. They wound up winning it in overtime, 13-10. And they wind up going to the championship game, where they wind up beating the Cleveland Browns 23-12. But I think the following season, I think the goalposts wind up being raised. Well, the Giants, let's see here. As I said, they went up 7-7, so nothing super spectacular. The first game of the season, they started off against the Dallas Cowboys. They lost 31-2 to the Cowboys. First game of the season, the Giants had a grand total of 8 first downs at 139 yards of offense. 31-2. What was the safety? Let me see. I think I'm sure in my years I probably looked to see what this safety was. But the Cabbage tackled Don Meredith in the end zone to make the score 17-2. But it was so that's what it was. That was one of Cat Cabbage's 5.5 sacks on the season. All right, so then always what winds up happening, except for one season, I think it was 1961. The Giants always started anywhere from their first 2 to their first 4 games on the road, and this year was no different. This year they started their first 4 games on the road because they're sharing the stadium with the baseball team. They're sharing Yankee Stadium with the New York Yankees. So what I believe happens is that the Giants start playing inside Yankee Stadium after the baseball season and after World Series and everything is over with, because they don't want to go in there and start chewing up the field and all. So their first 4 games, were all on the road. They didn't play their first home game until October 17th. And in 1965, let's see, the Yankees, they didn't go to the World Series. So that was the Dodgers and the Minnesota Twins went to the World Series that year. So, but the Giants' first 4 games were on the road. So they lost their first game on the road to Dallas, 31-2. The next week in Philadelphia, they beat the Eagles 16-14. The next week, they went on the road and they beat the Pittsburgh Steelers 23-13. Then they went on the road, and once again on Saturday, October 9th, against the Minnesota Vikings, they would lose 40-14 to their future quarterback, Frank Tarkenton. So now the Giants are 2-2. So now the Giants come home. 1, 2, 3. Now they're playing their next 4 games at home. So their first game at home is on Sunday, October 17th against the Eagles. They beat the Eagles 35-27. So now the Giants are 3-2. So now they're just back and forth. with wins and losses. They beat the Eagles 35-27. The following week at home on Sunday, October 24th against the Cleveland Browns, they lose 38-14. Now they're 3-3. The following week on Sunday, Halloween, October 31st, at home against the St. Louis Cardinals, the Giants would win 14-10. Now the Giants are 4-3. The following week, the Washington Redskins would come to town. So it's Sunday, November 7th at Yankee Stadium against the Washington Redskins. The Giants would lose 23-7. Now the Giants are 4-4. Then the Giants would go on the road and play in Cleveland on Sunday, November 14th, and they would lose 34-21. So now they're 4-5. The next week, they would go on the road once again on Sunday, November 21st, and play the Cardinals, and they would win 28-15. Now they're 5-5. The following week, on Sunday, November 28th, at home against the Bears, they would lose 35-14. So now they're 5-6. Then the following week, on Sunday, December 5th, they would play a home game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they would win 35-10. So now they're 6-6. The following week, they would go on the road, and on Sunday, December 12th, they play the Washington Redskins, and they would win 27-10. So now they're 7-6. Cool. Then they would lose their last game of the season. The Cowboys would come to Yankee Stadium on Sunday, December 19th, the final game of the season for the Giants, and they would lose 38-20. And so it would wind up 7-7. So it was just back and forth, win, a loss, two losses, 2 wins, a win, a loss, the whole season. But I mean, overall, it was rather remarkable that the Giants were able to bounce back from a 2-10-2 record to finish 7-7. What do we got, Teddy? 65 Celtics beat Cincinnati, then the Lakers. Dodgers win. Dodgers won to beat the Twins. Yep. Blackhawks lost the Stanley Cup. Yeah, well, yep. Those were good years back then. Of course, I was only 1 year old at the time, but but I mean, overall, the Giants, a good season for them. To go from 2-10-2 to 7-7, they had to go out and get themselves a quarterback. But this is one of the things that they went out, and this is one of the things that plagued them for such a long time. They had Charlie Connerly, who they drafted. They got him, let me say, I believe it was 1948. Well, he played for the Giants from 1948 to 1961. The 1961 championship game was his final game with the Giants. But what the Giants had to do constantly after that, was they had to go out and they kept trading for quarterbacks. It was one of their problems. They never drafted and developed a quarterback of their own. They went out and they got Y.A. Tittle in 1964. He was the Giants quarterback from 61 to 64. 1965, they went out and they got Earl Morrall. 65 and 66, Earl Morrall was the Giants quarterback. Then they went out and they traded for Fran Tarkenton. Fran Tarkenton was the Giants quarterback from 67 to 71. Then they traded him. Then they traded Fran Tarkenton back to the Vikings, and they got in his place, they got Norm Snead. Norm Snead was the Giants quarterback from 72 and 73. And then in 1974, the Giants traded for Craig Morton, who was there for the Giants for half of 74, all of 75, and 76. So, I mean, for a long time, the Giants just kept trading for quarterback after quarterback after quarterback. And, they traded for Earl Morrall, who played for the Giants for 2 seasons. Then they traded for Fran Tarkenton. They should have kept, but he only played for the Giants for 5 seasons. Then they traded for got Norm Snead in a trade. He played for the Giants for 3 seasons. Then they traded for Craig Morton, and he only played for the Giants for like 2.5 seasons. So that was one of the problems the Giants had. They had a lot of what they had to do to try to get talent in. They traded for guys, traded draft picks, traded players away to get talent in. They couldn't draft well. It's a huge problem the Giants had. Huge problem. That's why the cupboard got bare and they can never replace them. But in the 65 championship game, the Green Bay, the Packers wound up winning 23-12. It was 13-12 at halftime. Basically, it should have been 13-13 and a half, but the Browns missed an extra point. I think the snap was bad; it was high or something like that, and either Grozer tried to kick it, or he wasn't able to kick it. The snap was bad, but it was kind of funny because just before Lou Grozer was getting ready to kick the extra point, the announcer says, "Yeah, Lou Groza hasn't missed an extra point all season," and of course that's what winds up happening. The extra point try was no good, but it was 13-12 at halftime. The Packers scored in the third quarter. Paul Hornung scored on a 13-yard run in the third quarter to put it up to 20-12, which of course back then 20-12 is a 2-score game, and then Don Chandler kicked an additional extra point in the an additional field goal in the fourth quarter to make it 23-12. So basically kind of put the game out of reach. But unfortunately, sadly, the 1965 championship game was also Jim Brown's final game. He would retire after that season. He played 9 seasons. He was the leading rusher in NFL history up until that point in time, until about 20 years later, Walter Payton finally eclipsed his mark in the mid 80s, 85, I think it might have been 84. I don't remember exactly, but like 20 years later, Walter Payton. So Jim Brown, retired on his own terms after 9 seasons in a loss. But the Browns won the 64 championship game. They beat the Colts 27-0. So, but the Green Bay Packers, they were back once again. Jim Brown, 50 yards. He didn't do real well. And actually, another little side note, there was a pass that Jim Brown could have caught in the end zone. Ray Nitschke was covering him. And this was, I believe it was in the second half. He was in the end zone. The ball kind of hit him. I'm not sure if Nitschke got his fingertips on it to deflect the ball a little bit, but it looks like the ball could have kind of hit Jim Brown in the hands, and he could have held on to it. Might have made it a different ball game, but it was what it was. But I mean, the Packers were once again a very, very good team. So the Packers were back. They didn't miss the last 2 championship games, but they're back. So the Packers will be in the championship in 65, 66, 67. But now we're going to have a little changing of the guards now, because the Browns were in the past couple of championship games, but the Dallas Cowboys are going to start coming to existence here as far as the playoffs. Cowboys will be in the next. Cowboys were starting in 66. Cowboys were 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74. I don't think they went to the playoffs. They went 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81. I mean, you get the point. I mean, the Dallas Cowboys starting in 1966 were a ton of playoff games. The thing that kind of is a gut punch is they were coached by Tom Landry, who used to be the Giants defensive coordinator, and the Giants let him go to coach the Dallas Cowboys. And so the Giants were able to hold on for one more season. He could have possibly been their coach, and possibly the Giants would be going to a lot of these playoff games because the Cowboys had good players. They were able to draft well, and they had good coaching. The Giants did not have Ali Sherman, was not a phenomenal coach. They couldn't draft. They had bad players, and so therefore they had a lot of losing seasons. And also another gut punch is, once again, now the Green Bay Packers are starting to go to the championship games, winning championship games like the 1965 championship game. And they were also going to win the first 2 Super Bowls with the coach, Vince Lombardi, who the Giants had. It was their offensive coordinator. And after the 1958 season, he left and he wound up going to the Green Bay Packers. So once again, another gut punch. All of a sudden, now the 2 coordinators the Giants had on their team in the 50s are now taking their team to championship games. And the Giants are just floundering around trying to get good players just to try to, because they can't draft. Ali Sherman's not a very good coach. So unfortunately, This all leads to the wilderness years for the New York Giants, where we got Danny White was the first bust of the 80s. So I mean, this is just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg for the Giants. And it starts in 1964 and goes all the way to 1980. A lot of losing seasons. This wasn't a losing season. The Giants finished 7-7, so they rebounded rather well from the 1964 season when they were 2-10-2. But the 1966 season, which will be coming up tomorrow, is by far the worst season in Giants history. They wound up 1-12-1. Their defense was just ungodly, absolutely horribly pathetic. But that's tomorrow. So that pretty much wraps up the 1965 season. The Giants finished 7-7, finished in second place. Very respectable. Okay. But as I said, I'll be back tomorrow with the 1966 season, which just happened to be the 42nd season in the history of the New York Giants. I'll see you then.